Welcome to the Black Father's Pulse, the podcast where fatherhood meets purpose. I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas, clinical psychologist and professor, here to guide you through the multifaceted journey of Black fatherhood. Please note, the views expressed here are my own and not those of my employer. But get ready to dive into the dynamic world of Black fatherhood, where we celebrate the highs, tackle the lows, and share plenty of laughs along the way. Let's keep the pulse of fatherhood beating strong and vibrant. A community can be deeply engaged, aware, voting, organizing, showing up to town halls, and still lack the power to shape policy, budgets, and institutional priorities. This Black History Month, we're not just celebrating the past, we're examining the present. Why do Black fathers show up, vote, advocate, and still struggle to shape the systems that determine our children's health, education, and future? Dr. Okey Enyia is a nationally recognized health policy expert, government affairs strategist, and founder and CEO of Enyia Strategies, a mission-driven consulting firm advancing health equity and systems change. With over 15 years at the intersection of government, research, and advocacy, Dr. Enyia brings rare expertise, combining academic rigor with grassroots insight. He holds a doctorate in health policy from the George Washington University and has served as a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Health Policy Fellow, working with 3 members of Congress on landmark legislation, including the 21st Century Cures Act. Currently a research scholar at the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Enyia is author of the John Henry Health Equity Playbook, a 4-year health policy agenda for Black men, and the memoir Indisputable, the story of a favored son. Recent Substack articles, From Civic Health to Civic Power, Why Participation Alone Isn't Enough, challenges us to move beyond voting to building durable political influence. A member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Dr. Enyia is a husband, father, and bridge builder committed to policy that serves the people. Dr. Enyia, welcome to the Black Fathers Pulse podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Thomas.
So, Dr. Enyia, we could jump right in because I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. We've been doing some background conversations, kind of preparing ourselves for it. But one of the first things I kind of remember when I was reaching out to you to prepare this conversation, again, in celebration of Black history and understanding and appreciating the 100-year celebration of Black history, was the article that you wrote. Something in that article stopped me in my tracks. And the line was, Black communities, especially Black men, are often highly civically engaged, yet we continue to see underfunded health systems, disinvested in prevention, policy decisions made about communities rather than with them. How is that even possible in 2026?
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of this very critical moment in our nation's and our global history, for that matter. Mm-hmm. So it's possible because history repeats itself. You can go back to the early 1900s when Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about the souls of Black folk, and the prescience and the prophetic implications of his words still resonate in 2026. Now, I'm not surprised. I expect that, honestly, as someone who is a student of history, who knows their full history. And I say all the time that when you know your history, you know your power, especially as Black and brown people. In that context, When you know your history, your full history, you know your power. Why? Because you recognize that despite the structural racism, despite the white supremacy, despite the barriers, issues, challenges, despite the transatlantic slave trade and what that did to the African psyche and culture, we still are here.
Mm-hmm.
And so my thing is shifting from or helping people or helping us to shift from surviving to thriving. And
Mm.
we know that knowledge is power. So knowing what you have come through, knowing that you are resilient, knowing that knowledge of your greatness and your power to shift things. In fact, there's some places where your very presence shifts the atmosphere.
Mm.
Um, and so when we're talking about what happened hundreds of years ago and why it's still happening now, um, while yes, there have been meaningful changes that have transpired, yes. Um, at the same time, you recognize this push and pull of history, this
Mm-hmm.
the eras where there is progress, like the Reconstruction era, and then the
Mm-hmm.
backlash or the pushback after Reconstruction, right? With poll taxes, with literacy tests, with racial violence, lynching, bombing, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
and the erasure of history, right? So all of those things, and so there's this pendulum, this swing, and we are now living in what I discovered to be the third Reconstruction. In fact, I have
Mm.
two books here that substantiate where we are. The Third Reconstruction by Dr. Pinnell Joseph, and then Stony the Road by Dr. Henry Louis Gates. These
Mm.
two books, amongst others, of course, speak substantively to the progress and the backlash, the knowledge of history, and then the intentional erasure of history, which is what we are
Yeah.
literally living
Yeah.
through right now.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. So, I mean, so there are probably people in the audience who are saying there's a time and a place for books and for quote unquote knowledge
Hmm.
and for embracing history. And then there's a time and a place for action. How do we reconcile those two pieces, the need for immediate action, the need for current action, and a careful, critical understanding and appreciation for what came before and what's happening now? How do we make sure that in the midst of all of this kind of intellectual discussion that we don't become either um, ossified and stuck
Hmm.
in thought, and so we don't make any big moves that
Hmm.
changes history for us, or we become so disillusioned with all of the conversation that we act rashly
Right,
and out of timing and without proper awareness.
right.
How do we balance those two ends?
Yeah. So I'm going to use myself as an example of my approach to governing, my approach to helping shape policy
Mm-hmm.
at the local, state, and federal levels, giving knowledge of self, giving
Mm-hmm.
my training, and so there's what's called um, there. It is a matter of being clear about who and whose you are,
Mm-hmm.
which stems from again that knowledge of self, um, and with that knowledge comes that power and or that agency or to be empowered to explore ways in which you can effect change. So what are your unique lanes in the context of civil rights, in the context of advocacy? Are you going to occupy the protesting lane, or the rallying lane, or the policymaker lane, or the educator lane? What lane or lanes that are tied to your purpose make sense, that resonate with the ways in which you want to take that knowledge and make it practical? And so what that looks like, and part of the reason why I wrote my book, which is the first of its kind to actually be intentional about centering Black men and reframing the conversation around Black men, is to map out, so get this knowledge out of my head into written form, to share that content, to share the information, so that uh, I don't have to literally travel uh, around the world doing talks, but I can share my knowledge. And so my book is a 4-year health policy agenda for Black men. What does all of that mean? It is the first of its kind, meaning that in my context, in my space, in my ecosystem, because of my background and experience, there has never been an intentionality around documenting how policy making works, and what are the tools, the tactics, the strategies that anyone can use to help to be civically engaged. And so I was very intentional in my approach to creating a roadmap, a framework that clearly articulates who and whose we are as conscious Black men, or Black and brown people in general, and to say, all right, because I am a former staffer on Capitol Hill. I worked both in the House and the Senate. Because I've worked at the state level, because I work on the ground locally, I understand how to shift policy, how to shape policy. So the question then became, how do I translate this knowledge and make it very practical, so that whoever picks up this book can hopefully see themselves somewhere in the book and be encouraged and equipped to reach out, to collaborate, to partner, to build relationships, etc., so that you are part of the broader civic engagement process, which is not just voting, it's also attending town hall meetings, calling your local elected officials, emailing, posting online, calls, having these types of conversations. So those things and more, I argue that it is part and parcel of the broader civic engagement approach or framework to help you walk in power, and to not just try to secure small wins or the lowest hanging fruit, but how do you play the long game? This is about, for me, it's about playing chess, not checkers. And anyone who knows how to play chess, or has a concept or a construct around what that game is, you know that there are 16 pieces on the board, and each piece occupies a certain space or plays a certain role, right? And the objective is to protect the king, and to work with other roles, other people on the board, um, to help to effect change. And I'll even frame it this way: the chessboard can be a metaphor for the policy environment. So, in terms of health policy, what issues are we grappling with right now? It is Medicaid expansion or the lack thereof. It is public health being underfunded for decades. It is people not having access to care. It is lack of enough culturally humble providers, doctors, psychologists, etc., like just across the board. And so making this more personal, it's about, okay, where are you on the chessboard? Are you a pawn? Are you a knight, a queen? Like so, because then when you're clear about where you fit or sit, and you have a desire or an interest to help to effect change wherever you sit, then it becomes a matter of thinking strategically. That's the key word, is how do you think strategically be across administrations at the local, state, and federal levels, right? So I write about all of that in my book or on my blog, and so that's how I would answer that question.
So what I hear is everybody cannot do everything.
Correct.
There are specific lanes
Hmm.
that different people, based on interest, based on societal location, based on geographic location, based on socioeconomic status, based on a number of different things.
Hmm.
There are specific things that you have a comparative advantage
Hmm.
in being able to do. So, for example, you have a comparative advantage in being able to sit and function in policy spaces, to be able to do that kind of moving around at that high political level if you wanted to. But an individual, the mom and pop on the block, have the strategic advantage of being on the ground and
Right.
having a very clear understanding of what these policies look like and what the absence of these policies look like in everyday reality,
Absolutely.
and what these new policies could potentially look like in everyday reality.
Hmm.
And each of these individuals in their separate spaces work towards a common goal. And if the common goal is expansion of Medicaid, then we're all working toward this common goal, but from a different point of view.
Hmm.
I'm applying the chess metaphor, and I couldn't help but also think that in chess, there are strategic sacrifices that are made. And I know you were thinking about it as you were saying it. I was like,
Uh-huh.
the goal is to protect the king. And the king, there could be any number of things. It doesn't have to be a person.
Right.
There could be one big policy move
Hmm.
that you want to achieve, like maybe reversing qualified immunity for
Sure.
police,
Hmm.
or instituting mandatory paternity leave
Hmm.
for fathers.
Hmm.
So those are big policy shifts.
Right.
But there might be smaller policies that you might be willing, at least for now, in
Right.
this current game, to allow to be jettisoned, to
Hmm.
be put aside for later, if we can make big moves on this particular policy. So
Correct.
I will sacrifice any forward ground on this other policy
Hmm.
if it's going to allow me to make a bigger move on a bigger, wider, sweeping policy.
Correct.
Doesn't mean that we can't come back in a second round of the game
Right.
to now push this originally sacrificed policy,
Hmm.
push it now to the top, and sacrifice or jettison another policy later down the
Right.
road. But it feels like there's these very specific discussions and specific roles that people play and can be part of. But often I think there's the discontinuity in communication.
Yes.
So the individuals who are in the White House spaces and in the legislative spaces in the state legislature are not often hearing the voices of the individuals who are on the ground, the grassroots people. And the grassroots people are thinking, well, these people aren't listening to us because they're eating the caviar and they're dining with these people and they're
Right.
doing all of these highfalutin things. So obviously they've forgotten us. And so I think back to your Substack article where you open with this really nice history lesson. You said that about that I think Black fathers need to hear. You talked about how during Reconstruction there were over 2,000
That's right.
Black men holding public office, and that wasn't just participation, that was power.
Hmm.
And today, I would dare say that across the U.S., we have more than 2,000
Absolutely.
Black men, more than 2,000 Black people in power.
Mhm.
What did that create back then during Reconstruction? And have we created anything significant in comparison to our representation currently?
Wow, yeah, that's a fantastic question. So here's a book that I'm also reading. It is Capital Men, um, the epic story of Reconstruction through the lives of the first Black congressman. And so this speaks to go, um, kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier about the push and pull, the progress and the backlash. And so while there has been some progress, there have been an increase in the numbers of Black and Brown people winning elected office across the country at all levels. Broadly speaking, systems are made of people, and the people who had the power, or who typically have the power to create systems, have not been Black and Brown people. It's been white people.
Mm-hmm.
In the context of imperialism, in the context of the colonial times, all that was taking place back then put systems and things in place that continue to shape outcomes. And so, in fact, there's a saying from someone that I often quote, is that systems are designed to achieve the outcomes that actually happen.
Yeah.
Right
Yep.
now, the second part of this then is, while on one hand we have, yes, back in the Civil War, post Reconstruction era, there were over 2,000 Black men who held office, and there were public health systems that were expanded and other progress being made. There is a human element to this, because when we live in a society or a sphere where we are seeing Black power
Mm-hmm.
at different stages of our nation's history, there's a tendency to fall into complacency.
Yeah.
And being human, we are not necessarily motivated to change unless crisis happens.
Right.
So we have to kind of grapple with that tension. It's, yes, we can celebrate the election of the first Black president
Mm-hmm.
of the United States, yes, and we were, according to Ta-Nehisi Coates, 8 years in power.
Mm.
But look at what happened after that,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
backlash, right?
Right.
So let's be clear about the narrative arc of history, because when we become clear and can appreciate the full history, ideally, and this is why I wrote my book, and this is why I move the way that I move, is thinking long game, playing chess, not checkers.
Mm.
So that is the reality, is uh, can we get enough Black and Brown people, or those who historically have not been at the table, can we create a a critical mass and sustain that long term, so that outcomes can shift? Now, I'll also say this: if you are not at the table, you are on the menu.
Mm.
But I'll go further to say that, and this speaks to the power piece, or to civic power, is when you help to build the table, you get to decide what gets served.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at in my shift about, okay, while it's nice to get to the table, but when you get there, do you actually have a credible voice? Are you actually listened to? Are you, like,
Right.
do you have the data, whether it's hard data or your story, to help, convince uh, staffers on a hill or staff at the state level about how you want to see things change? And so that's the whole premise behind the civic power piece, is how can we help to get more people that share our culture, our experience, our background, our interests, to help to build the table, to set the agenda, to determine priorities, so that we can then better decide who actually gets served. And so that is the tension. That is the reality. My thing is that I'm being very intentional, and I'm leaning full tilt into this particular era of our nation's history, so that, and I'm writing it down and I am documenting it, and I'm doing my parts, so that at least at the end of the day, I have walked in the fullness of what I've been called to do. I have been on mission. I've been on assignment.
Thank you so much for that. If our listeners are wondering why this seemingly high level conversation about history and policy, it's because policy influences biology. Policy is directly connected to things like stress, lack of healthcare access, environmental racism, institutional racism. Those are all related to discriminatory policies, and those are all related to shortened telomere length. And telomere length essentially is the code, the messaging in your genes, the basic building block of the human body. It's the code that exists in every one of your cells that tells your cells to continue to replicate and for how long to replicate. And why is that important? When your cells get to the point where the replication element ends, that is called death.
Death.
So the shorter your telomere length, the shorter your lifespan, the quicker you die. Black men in Wisconsin live an average of 52 to 42 years. That is the lifespan. I am not very far from 52 to 54 years, sorry. I said 42. 52 to 54 years. I am not very far from that. So based on the statistics, if I continue to live in this space, I may not have that much long to live. And those who were born in this space can expect that general lifespan. Yeah. So if policy affects biology, when we don't have access to power, political disempowerment literally makes us sick. Not being able to vote, not being able to decide these things for ourselves literally kills us, literally makes us sick. So when our grandfathers could not vote,
that's right,
that didn't just affect politics, it affected life expectancy. And I think you have that, that line in your book as well. And you share that the Voting Rights Act restored access to voting in 1965. And that's almost 6 decades, 60 years ago. Why are there still these large power gaps? And that's putting your question back to you. Why is there still this large power gap? And what does history teach Black fathers in 2026 that we need to know to do differently?
Yes, that is a critical question, and I will respond using a quote from one of my mentors, Dr. Matthew L. Stevenson III. He said that great men and women are only born for the time that they are needed the most.
Yep.
Great men and women are only born for the time that they are needed the most. So because I've been born, because you have been born, because we have been gifted and given these interests, skill sets, etc., energy, we have the responsibility to make every effort to make or leave this earth, this place, better than how we found it in some way, shape, or form. That is part of what drives me personally. And so, as I am on my book tour, as I am having conversations, as I am writing and serving on panels, on podcasts, etc., it's how am I being authentic and being strategic in my approach to serving as an example of how to self advocate. What does it mean to help again to shape policy, to be civically engaged? And so my book, it looks to reframe the narrative around Black men to shift from a deficit framed approach or a pathological framework to an asset based or a strengths based framework, so that it gives us as Black men, as Black fathers, Black people, agency, language, context, content that can help shift your thinking around where you sit in the world. And as a consequence, and so because you are actually seeing yourself in this writing, in this experience, in this person, and you see that they, despite what they've had to go through, is thriving, that gives you hope, that gives you encouragement, that gives you some sense of clarity and resolve to keep going. And I'll also note that it is important to take what I frame as uh, strategic rest. Rest is resistance. There's a book by her name is Trisha Hershey, I think. It's titled
Yeah.
"Rest is Resistance," right? And so
Yeah.
it's again, how do you decouple from the over functioning, the over compensation, the need to prove yourself, the need to be double, to be respected as half as good, right? Quote unquote. Um, how do you be more intentional about your self care and your soul care regimen? Meaning, for me personally, it's about talking about my own experience, having grappled with depression, anxiety, racial trauma, microaggressions, uh, life experiences, different types of environments that I've been the only or one of a few Black men in the room, where I'm trying to shape policy and trying to, work both the inside game and the outside game. And I can get to that later, but it is all that. And then to your earlier point about the ways in which, and I'll map this to the John Henry metaphor, the mountain that John Henry drilled through to beat the train or the machine at the cost of his life, that mountain is a metaphor for a plethora of things. One of which is chronic stress, racism, systems of oppression. And so when you have to, and so when you don't have the agency or have to navigate systems and society and cultures that where you are constantly hyper vigilant and you are overworking and you have to have your armor on, that literally, right, that it eats away at your cells. It shortens the telomeres. It impacts every system in your body, every organ in your body, which is why we have the long-standing, entrenched, stark disparities across race and ethnicity now. The good news, I'll say that, for me, and this is based on my own experience, is having a robust or building and having a robust self-care and soul care regimen. What do I mean by that? It includes journaling on a daily basis, breath work, yoga, mindfulness, prayer, meditation, the gym, those things that bring you joy, coupled with seeing a Black male psychologist on a regular basis. I've been seeing my own Black male psychologist for the past 8 years on a at least once a month. I also have an executive coach
Mhm.
to help me process my emotions, to give me language and context for what is happening in my life as a husband, as a father, as a son, as a coworker, etc. And we know that the self-care modalities, those things serve as protective factors and against the chronic impact or stress of navigating spaces that weren't built with us in mind, or where we as black and brown people, black men, don't feel safe. So that is part of my counterbalance, and has been for years now, my counterbalance to navigating spaces as a conscious black man, decoupling from the over functioning to being okay with just with being enough, decoupling from imposter syndrome, just being enough and being confident in the power that I know that I have. And I frame it as quiet power. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I have heard the phrase and the book title "Rest is Resilience,"
Hmm.
and I definitely embrace it. And I know some fathers out there may not be able to afford to see a therapist, or may
Yes.
not have healthcare access, may not be able to afford and have the luxury of an executive coach and
Hmm.
being able to find time for yoga and meditation and all of that. But there are spaces, there are resources in your community, in your environment that allow you to take care of yourself. If that is just going to the gym
Yeah.
a couple of times a week. And if you can't go to the gym, going down to the park and doing pull ups or push
Hmm.
ups, or walking around the park, going
Yeah.
out and sitting at the park and fishing,
Hmm.
connecting with other people, meeting, using social media to have small group discussions,
Hmm.
taking podcast episodes like this, sharing it with your partners,
Hmm.
listening to it, and then coming back and discussing. It gives you a space, an outlet for what's going on in your head, for
Yes.
what's going on in your heart. It
Hmm.
is that outlet that we're often missing. This, what used to be community,
Right.
what used to be easily accessible
Right.
community. In some spaces, we have had to outsource that
Hmm.
to professionals. And for
Correct.
those who can't afford professionals, that space is still available to you. You can still make that space for yourself.
Absolutely.
Where you need the professionals, like for therapy, where you need specific therapeutics, definitely go in and get that. But where you need community, people to listen to you without judgment,
Yes.
create that for yourself. And in some cases, it already exists.
Hmm.
Dr. Enyia, you've been talking a lot about John Henry, and I think this is an excellent place to transition.
Okay.
You talked about the metaphor of the mountain in John Henry's story. Your book is called The John Henry Health Equity Playbook.
Hmm.
For listeners who may never have heard of John Henry, or might think they have a general idea but not very sure, give us a rundown. Who was John Henry,
Hmm.
and why does his story matter to black fathers today?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So,
Yeah.
so as I was doing the research for this book, I actually discovered that there were two real life John Henrys.
Oh.
Yes. So the first John Henry was a 19-year-old convicted felon, um, that was released from prison to enter what was called the convict leasing system in the post Reconstruction era. So,
Neo
and
slavery, essentially.
yeah, right, right, exactly. Right, right.
Conflict, convict release system. Other words, hire a slave.
Yes.
Okay,
So
go on.
exactly. So to keep black men in their place, to keep the labor available, the convict leasing system was put in place to help to build the American economy during that time. And so, from a conceptual perspective, the idea of the strong, viral black man, who was just good for labor and work, was permeating that time very uniquely in that there was a need for the people in power to create a way to exploit our work, our labor as black men. So John Henry was released from prison to work on a railroad um, in the Midwest, but he was part of a broader system, a broader culture, a broader dynamic of hundreds of thousands of black men being relegated to that type of work. So while there was an actual person, broadly speaking, it spoke to those times. Fast forward into the 1970s, there was also a John Henry Martin, who was a North Carolina sharecropper. He was born in 1907 and he died in 1978, I believe. And a colleague of mine, Dr. Sherman James, who actually came up with the John Henryism hypothesis, he interviewed John Henry Martin
Oh,
because he was
wow.
interested. Yeah, because and he interviewed John John Henry Martin when Dr. James was a graduate student and he was working on his doctoral work. And so, in the course of that interview, in the course of that particular time period, Dr. James found it very fascinating that he literally discovered a John Henry Martin who embodied or had a similar experience with the John Henry in the 1800s, who was symbolic of the broader John Henrys at that time. Now, with John Henry Martin, what happened was that um, he wanted to get his family out of debt. So he was a sharecropper, but he was unique in that he actually was able to get his family out of debt, but it cost him his health. So he suffered from arthritis, from peptic ulcers, again, stress, right? Stress can cause
Right.
ulcers, right? All of that to say that the John Henry legend story stems from the fact that the black man was tasked with racing a locomotive, a train through a mountain. He was drilling and he beat that train, but at the cost of his life. And that is symbolic of, or a metaphor for, the ways in which systems impact health and other social drivers of health, and it's carried forward. On a more personal, practical perspective, it's getting clear about how I've been shaped, my upbringing, my experiences, how I need to decouple from over functioning and hypervigilance and imposter syndrome, to get to a place where I can walk in the power of being or belonging without bracing or without this threat. And again, which is why the whole John Henry story resonated and made sense, was because of my own lived experience. So part of what I want to carry forward is to give language and context uh, around who we are as black men, but to also offer policy and practice recommendations and the power of storytelling to say, okay, this was what was happening back then. Yes, it's still happening now, but I now have language and context to be able to shift things and to work and to move in a different way.
So thank you very much for that. In your Substack, you talk about, in fact, you're right that the legend of John Henry mirrors a recurring expectation placed on black communities.
Mm-hmm.
And that expectation is work harder, participate more, endure longer without structural support.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm looking into a mirror
Mm-hmm.
because that has been the story of my academic life.
Mm-hmm.
And as I look back at my academic life, I see the successes, but I realize that I have paid a heavier price
Mm-hmm.
than people who don't look like me.
Correct.
And the rewards that were promised to me pale in comparison to the rewards that are offered to people who don't look like me
Mm-hmm.
and who worked half
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes less than half as hard,
Mm-hmm.
who endured less than I endured, who
Mm-hmm.
participated less than I participated, and yet benefited from the system,
Mm-hmm.
benefited from the machine that is academia, the machine that is society.
Mm-hmm.
And as fathers, we feel this. I keep hearing fathers say, I will do anything for my family.
Sure.
I will do anything for my child, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But the anything usually means working jobs that will put me at risk,
Mm-hmm.
working hours that will put me at risk,
Mm-hmm.
taking risks that puts my mortality at the top.
Mm-hmm.
We're told to be at every parent-teacher conference,
Right.
every community meeting, every voting booth, and we do it,
Mm-hmm.
but we're still exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
We're still losing. What then is the solution? How do we avoid John Henry's fate? How do we win without dying in the process?
That is the question. And
Yes.
there's no one solution.
Yeah.
I always argue that it is a multifaceted approach. It is a multi-level interventional uh, approach, and I think it gets back to when we get to a place where we recognize what is happening and we're clear about what's been happening. The question then for me becomes, okay, what all can I do now without overextending myself, without incurring the emotional tax? Because what we're also speaking to is the emotional labor of seeing all of these needs and navigating these spaces, but feeling disempowered or powerless and with no agency to be able to not react but to respond. And the way that I would answer that question is for us to continue to do what we are doing now, is to have these conversations, but also think strategically. So for me, I am a systems thinker. I think in second and third order impacts. I think long term as well as short term wins. I think as an architect, as a governor, as seeing all of again back to the chess, seeing all of uh, the roles or the positions, the players on the board, and it comes with a shift in thinking. And another critical element of this is what we shared earlier, is the self-care and soul care piece and the rest piece, and continuing to do those things, but also taking it further to say, okay, now that I am where I am today, what are the ways in which I can codify, I can institutionalize my lived experience, so that in some way, shape, or form, again, I've made this place or this person better than how I found them. The way that I've stayed grounded and rooted in all of this is to be very clear on my assignment, to know that while I'm on this earth, this is part of my assignment. Here are the ways in which I can give back and lift as I climb and make it easier for others to occupy spaces and to walk in the fullness of what they have been called to walk in. So I know that that's not necessarily like a like a silver bullet question
Right,
answer,
right.
um, but I think it's a authentic, real response to a very complex, sophisticated dynamic.
So you actually provided five very tactical strategies
Okay.
in your Substack
Mm-hmm.
article, and we will actually close with you exploring those 5 strategies. But before we do that, I wanted to, because we're kind of pushing on time now,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to respect your time. But I want to go back to a conversation that we had even before we jumped on here about John Henryism, and just the knowledge of that myth or of that hypothesis. I went to Morehouse College, an HBCU. I know most of my friends who went to HBCUs know the story of John Henry, and can tell you what the applications are to the story or the myth of John Henry.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people outside of the HBCU experience know the story. And we were just talking about an experience that you had
Mm-hmm.
coming to terms with the fact that this is not as widespread as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
This being the celebration, the 100th celebration of Black History Month, I think back to a parent child dynamic I had the privilege to observe, where a black parent, was explaining to her son about the struggles that black people go through. Her son was probably about 14, 15, and explaining to him about Martin Luther King and the struggles and the fight and all,
Mm-hmm.
and Malcolm X and all of that. And her son was pretty annoyed, pretty perturbed by it. And his response was, well, that was then. This is now.
Yeah.
We live in a different time. What does that have to do with me? That's just history. So, thinking of that against the backdrop of what you were just describing, this absence of awareness of something as basic as John Henryism,
Mm-hmm.
what does that tell us about the work that needs to happen?
That we have a lot of work to do. That we still have a lot of work to do. Right. That's the concise answer. Is that given where you are, given where you sit, what are the ways in which you are trying to educate, empower, and equip those within your sphere of influence?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it is those gaps, it is those challenges that actually serve as motivators for why I and we do what we do. Um, and the way that I frame it is, because I used to be in a space where, yes, I want to change the world. I want to do all these things, and yes, that is noble, and like, but you, you get to a place where you become strategic and selective in the
Mm-hmm.
ways in which you want to contribute your time, talent, and treasure. So I'm going to continue. And again, this is part of the reason why I wrote my book, because there was those gaps. There was a need to continue to educate, to continue to talk about this very important history, and to contemporize it. So, because I think another layer to this is, when history isn't contemporized, where the dots are connected to your lived experience and your lived realities right now, that's where we miss the boat oftentimes. And so part of my challenge has been, as a public speaker, as a scholar, as an intellectual, as an expert, is how can I take this John Henry metaphor and make it make sense for anyone, make it real, make it relevant, grapple with it to get the messaging, the framing, the narrative to a place where it resonates, it lands, it helps people see themselves somewhere in the text, in the story, right? So it's actually beyond just race and gender. Uh, it 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 is fundamentally, from a psychological perspective, and a sociological perspective. How are you showing up as a person? Um, what are the ways in which you might be overextended? Um, how are you trying to manage your time, your energy? How are you trying to disrupt, dismantle, and or transform systems that don't work, or um, create barriers and such? So that's, I recognize the challenge. There's always going to be a need for people like us to do what we do. We've been built in times like these because we've been built for times like these.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yep.
mhm.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you so much for that. So in your article, you lay out, you kind of outline 5 strategies to move from participation to power. So let's kind of rapid fire through them for fathers who are listening. Give you about 30 seconds to respond to each strategy. So strategy 1, build civic infrastructure, not just turnout. What does this look like for a father who wants to start today?
Yeah. So the tool is community policy fellowships and leadership pipelines for Black men. And so what that looks like is supporting year-round civic organizations, investing in policy education, not just voter education, and normalizing local governance participation, meaning serving on boards, on commissions, and councils.
And strategy 2, institutionalized civic engagement as a health strategy. So you say that voting is a public health indicator. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we know that those communities that are more civically engaged tend to experience better health outcomes for several reasons. One is that those communities that are more educated, that
Mm-hmm.
make more money, um, they have more knowledge, and live in a space where they have more agency to build relationships, or to be involved. They're able to connect with elected officials with their needs and concerns on a sustainable basis. And so, because of that steady engagement, the elected officials have the information, the knowledge about what is happening on the ground to help them shape policy that can hopefully effect change. And so, part of what that looks like practically is to embed civic engagement into health systems, and I'm part of some work that's being done there now. Fund community-based organizations as health partners, and then treats policy advocacy as prevention work.
Excellent. And strategy 3, shift from reactive to strategic engagement. How do fathers move beyond just showing up when there's a crisis?
Yeah. So get into a place where you're able to actually track budgets and not just bills, because the budgets are a picture of what you find important. Budgets are what you prioritize. So it's important to attract the bills, but also where is the money going? How is it being allocated? And then also, after that bill is passed, for example, the, the next step is implementation. So, what does that bill look like practically? How is it actually making a difference on the ground? And then also just to stay engaged after the elections. It's not this one-off type thing. It's actually
Right.
long game, sustainable, right? That's the thing, is don't just vote and then bounce, but actually, how do you build the relationships and the partnerships long term, so that your voice is heard and you're able to help to build a table to help decide who gets served.
Excellent. And the fourth strategy, play the inside outside game. This is your congressional experience talking, but what's this inside outside game?
So the inside strategy um, is becoming an expert in some area, and as an expert, what I mean by that is your lived experience. Like,
Right.
how are you able to articulate and or share your lived experience in a way that resonates with key decision makers, or is timely, right? So the inside game is your lived experience or your policy expertise, your training. It is the relationships, and it is governance, knowing how the policy process works on the inside. The outside game is the outside pressure, meaning uh, the community. How is the community engaging? How is the community partnering? How are we organizing? What is our narrative power? What is our messaging? How are we going to communicate our needs to people on the inside to help them on the inside shape policy?
Thank you so much. And the fifth strategy, measure power, not just participation. What should fathers be tracking to know if they're building power?
Follow the money. Where's the money going? What programs have been put in place? What institutions have been created or sustained? And who is at the table? Those are metrics or ways in which you could measure progress or success. Is where is the money going? What programs or interventions have been put in place? And how do you make sure to hold people accountable once they get into office based upon what is being measured? Because I'll also add that one cannot measure what one cannot improve what isn't measured. And what is measured oftentimes is a political decision. It is a policy decision as to what gets measured. So if you're making a conscious decision to measure something or not, that will impact the case that you are trying to make when we're talking about power and how to shape policy.
Thank you so much. So I look behind you and I see a number of accolades on the wall, and one of the most prestigious ones you received was number one dad or best dad.
Yes.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And so as we're celebrating Black History Month, in fact, the 100th celebration of Black History Month, if you could speak to every Black father in America right now, knowing the history, knowing the challenges, knowing what's at stake, what would you say?
To shift to a place where you stand in the fact that you want to give people a reason why you should vote for them. So for Black men, it is about being so clear and courageous to demand that your voice be heard and taken seriously, giving people, giving institutions uh, a challenge for why us as Black men, us as Black fathers should vote for you up and down the ballot. And so I would point us back to history. Um, we have been here before. We know what this looks like. There's no excuse, frankly. At this stage, I am moving differently. My mindset is different, but that's the reason. But that is the other reason why I am sharing what I'm sharing, because I had the blessing and the opportunity to be poured into, to receive all of this information, and then package it in ways that hopefully resonates and are timely for the different audiences that I'm trying to reach.
And can you share with viewers and listeners where they can find your books, where they can follow you, where they can get some of this information that you've been sharing?
Absolutely. So my website is EnyiaStrategies.com. That's ENYIA strategies.com. You can find both my books on my website. You can find my books on Amazon. I have a soft cover and a audiobook and an ebook, but my audiobook is coming soon. So for those who want to read on the go, I'm going to have that available at some point soon. My socials, you can find me at Enyia Strategies. You can find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, IG, Facebook. You can Google me. I'm there, and I'm happy to serve in ways that hopefully are a blessing to your life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Enyia, for your time, for your scholarship, for your service, for this really necessary work that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the lessons that I take away from this conversation are that participation is necessary, but power is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Political disempowerment literally makes us sick, literally kills us. And Black fathers must teach the next generation not just to show up, but to govern. I'm going to say that one again. Black fathers must teach the next generation not just to show up, but to govern. So please go out there, read Dr. Enyia's Substacks, get that book, get both books, share with other people as well. This is Black History Month, brothers. Let's honor our ancestors by finishing what they started. And as we take ground, it is necessary not just to continue to take ground, but to secure the ground that we've already taken, to consolidate that, to keep that. Because if it is not kept, it is going to be lost. If it is not defended, it is going to be lost. History that is not told and defended will be stripped and taken away and eventually lost. Let us be informed by history, not crippled by it, informed by it. So not just knowing the history, but allowing the history to affect how we govern, how we engage, how we navigate our society. Our forefathers gave us the vote. Again, I'm going to say that. Nobody gave it to us but our forefathers through their struggle, through their blood, sweat, and tears. Our forefathers gave us the vote. And now we must take the power, not just for ourselves, but for our children. This was the Black Fathers Pulse podcast. You've been listening to the Black Fathers Pulse. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and director of the TriLab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Views shared on this podcast are mine or that of my guest and are not associated with the university. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva, artwork by Isabella Acra. The podcast is produced by me and is supported by the kind contributions of you, the public, and advertisers. Follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758, that's Dr_AT758, or the Black Fathers Pulse podcast on Instagram and YouTube. Subscribe to the Black Fathers Pulse podcast wherever you do your podcast listening, and don't forget to share and leave us a positive review.